sound which is created during autumn season. The sound of the west wind is the dirge sung on the death of the year. To which this closing night will be the dome of a vast sepulchre, and and west wind, and this night uh, will be a dome which is created. Dome is a round structure created on a grave. The poet says that this night will um, will be a dome uh, on the vast sepulchre or grave of the year. Vaulted with all thy congregated might of vapors, from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hell will burst. And this this sepulchre will be arced by the congregated might of vapors or congregated might of clouds, from whose solid atmosphere black rain and fire and hell will burst. And from these clouds, uh, there will be rain, lightning, and hailstorms. Uh, Oh dear, thou who didst waken from his summer dreams the blue Mediterranean, where he lay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams. Uh, in this stanza, the poet expresses the activities of the west wind on the ocean. uh, the poet personifies the west wind, and he says that the west wind awakens the Mediterranean from its sleep. The Mediterranean who is sleeping, where he lay, lulled by the coil of his crystalline streams, beside a pumice isle in Bias Bay. uh, the poet imagines that the poet personifies the Mediterranean, and he says that Mediterranean is sleeping. He is lulled. He is soothed by the sweet sound or musical sound of the streams which fall in the ocean, or in the Mediterranean, beside a pumice isle, uh, in in the Bay of Bice. And so in sleep, old palaces and towers, quivering within the waves' intenser day, um, and at the shore of Mediterranean, there are palaces and towers, um, and these and there is a reflection of these palaces and towers in the water of the Mediterranean. And in the water of the Mediterranean, these palaces and towers appear quivering. uh, it means their reflection quivers in the waves, in the bright sunlight, uh, during the day, all overgrown with azure moss and flowers so sweet, the sense faints picturing them. And they are grown, um, I mean, they are dark blue flowers, which are very fragrant. All these flowers are grown on these towers and palaces. And and one feels sleepy when he or she imagines this situation. Though for whose path the Atlantic's level powers cleave themselves into chasm, while far below the sea blooms and the oozy woods, which wear the sapless foliage of the ocean, know thy voice and suddenly grow grey with fear. When the west wind blows over the Atlantic Ocean, uh, the waves of the Atlantic cleave themselves to make a path for the west wind to blow over it. Uh, and um, and at the bottom of this Atlantic Ocean, there grows some sea blooms and woods uh, which have leafless plants. I mean sapless the plants which have sapless foliages, uh, and where sapless foliage of the ocean know thy voice and suddenly grow grey with fear and tremble and dispose themselves. The poet says that when the west wind blows over the Atlantic Ocean, the sea blooms and oozy woods which are grow which are grown in the ocean um, begins to tremble with the fear of the west wind, and they begin to despoil themselves. Oh dear, if I were a dead leaf, thou mightest bear, if I were a swift cloud to fly with thee, a wave to pant with beneath thy power, and share the impulse of thy strength, only less free than thou, O uncontrollable. If even I were as in my boyhood, the poet, in these lines, the poet uh, uh, presents an affinity with west wind. He says that if in these lines, the poet um, says that if he were in these lines, the poet says that if I were a dead leaf, thou mightest bear. The poet says that um, if he were a dead leaf, he could the west wind could have driven him, um, and if he were a swift cloud, he if he were a swift cloud, if he were a cloud, he could um, fly with the west wind, and if he were a wave, he could experience the power of the west wind and share the impulse of thy strength, only less free than thou, O uncontrollable. And he says that he addresses west wind as uncontrollable, and he says that if he were a leaf, a cloud, a wave, he could experience the power of the west wind, and he could he he at that time he could be as free as the west wind. If even I were as in my boyhood, and could be the comrade of thy wanderings over heaven, as then when to outstrip thy sky speed scarce seemed a vision, I would never have striven as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need. The poet says that even if he had as much strength as he had in his childhood, in his boyhood, then he could be a companion of west wind uh, in its wanderings over the sky, over the seas, or the land. Even if he had as much capacity, as much strength as he had in his boyhood, um, he could compete with the west wind, and he could uh, outstrip it in its sky speed. I would never have striven as thus with thee in prayer in my sore need. The poet says that even if he had as much strength as he had in his boyhood, he could not have uh, begged before west wind um, in his sore need. He appeals to the west wind,